Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alexander Buch. I'm the Executive Director of IUFRO, the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, and it's my great pleasure to moderate to our webinar today with the title "Forests and the Climate Agenda: Aligning Science, Policy, and Business Ahead of COP30." As I think we are all aware, forests will play a central role at this year's Conference of the Parties of the Climate Convention, this year's Climate Change Conference. And therefore, we felt it's a good time to really explore how science-based forest strategies can inform climate policies and how science, business, and policy can align more effectively to make these strategies even more effective. Today's webinar is part of Teaming Up for Forest, which is a partnership established by IUFRO together with MONDI in 2021 with the aim of bridging science and practice, knowledge and practice. Before we dive in, please allow me to introduce, and here on the slide, you see again the aims of that webinar, and apologies for the slight delay in actually loading the slides. On this slide, you can see the names of our panelists who actually gratefully accepted the invitation to be on the panel today, and each of whom will offer a very unique perspective on the topic of today's webinar. Please allow me to very briefly introduce them one by one. Our first panelist today will be Nelson Grima. Nelson is the Science Policy Program Coordinator at IUFRO and also the coordinator of Teaming Up for Forests. Next, we will have Edith Paredes. Edith is the Administrative Director of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, ACTO. We will also have on the panel Gladys Naylor. Gladys is the Group Head of Sustainability at MONDI. And our fourth panelist today will be Mr. Bernard de Galembert, who is the Director of the Forest Solutions Group at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Each speaker will share brief insights of up to 10 minutes. So panelists, please take note, up to 10 minutes from your respective sector's viewpoint. And then once we've heard from our four panelists, we are going to open up the floor for the discussion, for questions and answers. And for that purpose, my colleagues Maya and Laura will actually collect questions from the chat to ensure a smooth discussion. So I would like to encourage all of you participants, whenever a question comes to your mind, please feel free to post it in the chat so that later on we can take up your question in the Q&A section of that webinar. And of course, needless to say, we encourage you to actually actively participate in that discussion. But right now, let us go straight away to the panel. And I would like to start, if that is all right, with Nelson Grima. Nelson, working at the Science Policy Interface, you are, of course, very well placed for today's discussion from a broader science policy perspective. Science, I believe, increasingly shows that climate, biodiversity, and forest goals are deeply interconnected. Yet we can also see that policies and funding streams often treat them separately. So there's not that level of integration when it comes to the policies and funding streams per se. So that, of course, raises the question from your science policy perspective, Nelson, what opportunities do you see for greater policy coherence between forests, climate, and biodiversity agendas? The floor is yours, Nelson.
Thank you, Alexander. That's a very good question because when we talk about forest, climate, and biodiversity, we are actually talking about three different aspects of the same system. And these aspects are all very tightly interconnected. Forests, for example, regulate the climate by absorbing and storing carbon. They are home to most of terrestrial biodiversity, and they also support millions of livelihoods. But still, in policy terms, the agendas are often found in separate silos. This is clearly shown, for example, in the Paris Agreement that focuses on climate, the Kunming-Montreal framework that focuses on biodiversity, and then we have forest-related policies that are mostly at national level without a clear global framework. So bringing these agendas together is very challenging, but creating policy coherence in a way that actions in one area reinforce the other areas instead of undermining them, which is what is often happening nowadays, is becoming more and more critical. And the way to address this could be, we could divide this in different options depending on the different scales that we want to operate. For example, at the global level, countries could align their commitments. At the moment, most countries produce separate national plans for climate, which are known as NDCs, then separate plans for biodiversity, which are known as MBSAPs, and integrating these two separate plans into one land use or nature plan that streamlines the reporting and ensures the investment of multiple benefits would be a good way to improve the coherence between policies. At the national and local level, we would need to use a more integrated land use planning. For example, forest, agriculture, or infrastructure policies often compete on the same land instead of being addressed as different parts of the same system. So we could use, for example, spatial data to identify areas of high carbon or high biodiversity value that could be then preserved from infrastructure building on those specific areas. Also, there could be a scaling up of nature-based solutions, which could deliver climate, biodiversity, and also social gains altogether. Regarding finance, climate and biodiversity funds are often separated, and at the same time, agricultural subsidies still drive deforestation in many places. So to align these financial flows and have a sustainable land management can create incentives that to reward multiple outcomes and make a huge difference. But to implement these potential solutions I mentioned, we need a stronger governance, and this is crucial. In many ministries, for example, they operate still separately, even within the same government. So an interministerial body would be needed that coordinates what ministries are doing in their separate ways and makes sure that their plans are shared before they are put into practice, so they can harmonize and exploit synergies instead of working against each other as usually happens. Also, in many places, there are indigenous peoples and local communities that have been there for a very long time, and they know very well how to use the land. So these people should be taken into account before making decisions to understand what are their needs and what can they bring into the management plans. A way to also integrate them into the plans is to recognize their land rights, also to bring them more into the decision making. It's not only a just, but it's also an effective way to do it. So in summary, I would say that to have more coherence between forest, climate, and biodiversity, we need to move towards an integrated landscape and policy approach. And we can do that by aligning the goals of finance and governance and by empowering the people who are sustainably managing the forest on the ground. Back to you, Alexander.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naylor, for sharing these insights, important insights from the scientific community. And it will now be interesting to hear from the policy viewpoint, and therefore, Edith Paredes, we're really happy to have you on this webinar. And you know, the policy viewpoint, I think, is particularly relevant in the context from the Amazon region, and you, with the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, you coordinate policy efforts, you know, across the Amazonian countries, a region that, as we all know, is so critical for the global climate. So, Edith, of course, the question that I would like to ask you, we also heard from Nelson's statement about the importance of integrating these different goals. So, from your perspective, or from ACTO's perspective even, how would you say can policymakers best leverage the Amazon forest potential for climate mitigation while ensuring that strategies also provide sufficient safeguards for biodiversity conservation and make sure that those strategies also deliver, you know, the required benefits for local and indigenous communities? Or perhaps in a nutshell, what would you see as the key needs and commitments that are emerging from ACTO countries with a view to the COP30? Edith, please.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for your question, and thank you very much for the invitation for participating in this very important webinar. Well, as you said, Alexander, and I'm going to complement what Nelson said because everything is related. I think the challenges that in the global area we are facing are the same ones with more or less intensity at the Amazon region. So as we all know, the Amazon is one of the world's most vital ecosystems, not only for the region, but as we know, for the climate stability of the entire planet. And from this perspective at ACTO, we have to leverage our interventions and from the countries facing the Amazon's forest for climate mitigation. And those strategies must be grounded in science, in regional cooperation, and with strong social principles. You're seeing here back, and we moved because we wanted to show you those three approaches. And one of them, since we're here in this webinar, that it's related to science, we want to show you that we have here the screens behind me. It's where we're monitoring from a scientific perspective and a technical perspective how the Amazon forest is right now, what's the real status. And for that, we have a very high qualified technical team working here. And I want 3 minutes to share this speech with my colleague Isabel. She's the climate change specialist at the Amazon Regional Observatory, where with all these screens, we are monitoring our Amazon territory. So I will give Isabel the floor for the very rough data, and then I'll come back. Why is it important? And from that data, going back to your question, Alexander, how this science-based information is very important and a pillar for policymakers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Vilela. I'm a climate scientist, specialist in climate change. I've been analyzing more than 30 models, coupled atmospheric and ocean models. So here we have many model results. How is the climate change in the Amazon? So what's the climate shows to us? This climate they are using for IPCC, and they show that the Amazon will face high temperatures that could arise around the 2.45 more Celsius for the perspective projection for 2050, which means that we are very higher the tipping point expected, and the perspective of the precipitation, as well as the models will projected change in the rainfall. And for the most area in the Amazon, we are going to face a decrease of the precipitation. And the model estimated around more than 250 millimeters per year in most of the areas, especially in the areas that we are facing deforestation and some others stress. And besides that, we have the model shows we call the cascade effect, that others climate indices are also affected the Amazon. So more the climate change, we have the global effect there, that how the ocean is going to face the climate change. For example, we have effect in the Amazon. We call the transportation in the ocean called the AMOC in the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic Meridional Overturn Circulation. And it's another tipping point that the climate scientists say that could be. And if these transports in the ocean will reduction in the future scenarios, it will affect in different way in the Amazon as well. So the area that it's already vulnerable for the climate change and the high temperature and the less precipitation, it's going to be other effects, that it's going to decrease the precipitation in that area, as the ocean also contribute for the modulation of the ITCC, that how can I explain, the winds in the atmosphere conversion and bring vapor energy to the Amazon. So if it can change, it will affect very critical to the Amazon. Yes, it's that.
Thank you, Isabel. Those are very important technical and scientific factors and indicators, and policymakers based on that must recognize the potential and limits of the Amazonian forest to contribute in their net zero pathways. So the forest offers critical ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, climate regulation, and resilience building. But these services are under threat, as Isabel explained us, and in the Amazon region, as you heard, we have several other ecosystems that are other factors in the global area and arena that are affecting the Amazon forests. So deforestation, climate changes, extreme changes, and unsustainable land use change are other factors that will affect as well. So from ACTO, we support this realistic and science policy approach. And we countries, because we are just a secretary, so countries have agreed to have a sustainable forest management over short-term offsets. We are strengthening the monitoring and verification systems at our regional observatory, and we are starting to promote interoperability between data systems and ensuring transparency and credibility on forest-related topics. This year, it was implemented. We have a network, an Amazonian network of technical people dealing with forests at each of country. It's called the RAFO, the Amazonian Regional Forest Network. So, and we have two other networks as well that work together for the Amazon forest, the one for water authorities and the one for forest management, fire management. So ACTO member countries have taken huge steps, and they have named Amazon forest protection into their NDCs. Nelson talked about the NDCs as well. But since we are a regional organization, we complement and support national agendas, but it's not part of our direct implementation and direct support. So through the Amazon, we have already, Alexander, you were talking about how do we guarantee people in the Amazon? It's not just the forest, no? People, the Amazonian indigenous people and the local communities, they are the owners of the land. So we have in Bogota, we had a president summit, and it was established the Amazonian mechanisms for indigenous people and local community. So we ensure that with this platform, with this mechanism, all the topics that have to deal with their lives in the forest, with their land use, with everything as owners of the land that it's around it from the environmental, economic, and social point of view, the mechanism will be the platform to talk about these topics, where there's one representative of the governments and one representative of the local organizations, and then they are sitting together and deciding what are the priorities for people in the Amazon region. And in this mechanism, in this platform, we will receive at ACTO from them what are the priorities, what they discuss, what are the strategies, and we will merge and we will put it all together. It's a huge challenge. It's the first time ACTO has this mechanism, but it will be the place where all the topics will be discussed, and then they will be brought to the other spaces, the networks or special commissions for climate, for environment and health, and other topics as well. We have a multi-level of governance architecture. As I told you, ACTO provides a unique platform that unites the 8 Amazonian countries under political, diplomatic, and technical umbrella. And it's under ACTO, it's facilitated thematic networks, as I already explained, interministerial dialogue at the highest level with authorities, either with the ministers from each of the areas that we're facing and we're dealing with, as well as with the ministers of foreign affairs and the presidents. We'll soon have the reactivation of the Special Commission for Environment and Climate with a technical agenda and with the political support. And this commission will be divided in 2 subcommissions, one specifically for environment, biodiversity, and the other one specifically for everything that deals with climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. So we have scaling solutions and with working, scaling up, from local, where we want to have local, then regional, and then within the countries, then at the region. And then the South-South cooperation, the exchange of knowledge to a better management of the Amazonian forest, and identifying and replicating best practices in the forest governance with this new network that has been established. And positioning the Amazon in the global agenda. The Amazon is not reduced for a carbon accounting exercise, and the Amazon is not the forest. That's very important, and I would like to share this message here with you. A lot of times we think the Amazon and our minds go through forest, trees, but it's very important that there's a lot more. There's water. There are fires as well. There's a huge biodiversity, but mainly there are 50 million people living there. So forest-based mitigation action should be just, inclusive, and aligned with the long-term sustainability. And from climate mitigation strategies must center people, biodiversity, and governance in the long-term regional commitment that we are strengthening here at ACTO. And those all are the messages that we are bringing to COP30 to finalize the second part of the question. These very strong messages of regional cooperation, of center, the Amazon has in the center people, that we are approaching to the tipping point, and there's all our strategies and efforts are going there to avoid the tipping point. But it's not just a climate and an environmental issue, it's a social issue as well. And that we need everyone together to pull this. It's not just from the Amazon region, it's from the globe.
Edith and Isabel, thank you so much for actually, conveying that message so clearly. First of all, Edith and Isabel, I must say I'm truly fascinated by your background. I mean, you really give us a very direct first-hand insight into the work that you're doing, and that's truly fascinating. Isabel, thank you also for making so clearly the case about why the climate change impacts on the Amazon matter not only for the Amazon region itself, but also for the globe as a whole. And truly fascinating, Edith, to learn about the many ways in which ACTO not only provides a platform for coordinating the 8 governments in the Amazon region, but also gives some voice to the stakeholders, and especially also local communities and indigenous people. So truly fascinating. So thank you very much for that to both of you. Muito obrigado. And actually, with that, we move from the Latin American region, because Nelson happens to be right now in Peru and you are in Brazil. We now move to Europe and to the UK, and we are really glad to have as our third panelist, Gladys Naylor. As I mentioned earlier, Gladys, you had the group sustainability at MONDI, and with that you bring an industry perspective to this webinar and to this discussion. And of course, in your role as group head of sustainability at MONDI, you are at the forefront of how a major packaging company integrates climate goals with business operations. That is your basically everyday kind of challenge. And from your role, I would like to ask you, Gladys, how does MONDI see the contribution of sustainable forest management and wood-based forest products to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss? Gladys,
thank you. So thank you very much, Alexander. And good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone that's joining us online. It's really great to have you participating in this discussion today. So we've heard first of all, from Nelson. He spoke about how forests, climate, biodiversity are 3 elements of an interconnected system. And then we also heard so eloquently from Edith that importantly, we need to think about people as part of that system. And I'm happy today to reflect on the business perspective, because as people, we are dependent on having the economic activities that sustains our societies. So as we see the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss continue to intensify, the role of forests has become increasingly important. But we see forest management and wood-based products not only as part of the solution, but importantly, we see it as essential tools to build a resilient and low-carbon economy. So I'm going to start with a sentence that could perhaps be taken as slightly controversial, but we believe that the way to secure forests is to utilize them sustainably and not only set them aside for conservation. There are 3 key dimensions that are important in this regard. The first is the role of sustainable working forests. The second are the regulatory frameworks that guide responsible sourcing of wood and fiber. And thirdly, the importance of credible science that underpins the decisions and the approaches that we have to take in this regard. So let me just comment briefly on each of these 3 dimensions. The role of sustainable working forests. Working forests are essential not only to support our transition to a bioeconomy, but importantly also to support resilient ecosystems on which we depend. Actively managing forests, for example, by adjusting tree species and density in a way that protects biodiversity and ecosystem services on which all of us depend, but also supports a growing circular economy by providing a renewable raw material, mitigating climate through continued carbon sequestration, and also recreational use by society. We know that mature forests are increasingly vulnerable to natural disturbances and the adverse impacts of climate change, and this can disrupt the continuous supply of a sustainable wood raw material. We also know that older trees take up less carbon as they reach maturity. And here I would really encourage you to take a look at a great infographic that was developed by Teaming Up for Forests based on a discussion that was had at a recent workshop, which focused on the understanding of carbon dynamics in forest ecosystems. And the output from this has been displayed in an infographic, which is really easy to understand and gives us some good guidance. We've seen over the past decade how Central European countries have experienced widespread forest disturbances caused by windstorms, by droughts, and by bark beetle infestations. A 2024 study, which was published in the scientific journal Forests, mentioned that on average in Germany, the Czech Republic, and Austria, these events have resulted in around 17 million cubic meters of calamity timber annually. And this equates to nearly half of that region's total annual timber harvest. Last week, we saw the publication of the latest version of the Global Forest Resources Assessment. And this showed us that within the EU 27 member companies, since 1990, the forest area and the total carbon stock in forests has been increasing. But in 2020 to 2025, the rate of increase has reduced by half when we compare it to the period of 2000 to 2020. So this shows us that forest growth is slowing as the impact of climate change becomes more evident, whether that's a result of windstorms, forest fires, or pests and diseases, or other factors. But to ensure the long-term security of forests, it means managing the forests to be resilient under these conditions and allowing the forests to adapt. At the same time, we recognize that not all rare ecosystems and species can be protected within working forests. And that's why nearly a quarter of the European forests are designated for various protection purposes, primarily biodiversity, but also for water and soil conservation. The protected areas in Europe have doubled since 1990, and these areas need active management by national governments and the EU to meet conservation goals and also support the red-listed species that depend on these unique ecosystems for survival. The second aspect is regulation. Particularly in Europe, where we operate, responsible sourcing is already well established in our sector, thanks not only to robust regulation and strong governance, but also to a mature certification scheme landscape. For MONDI, we source almost 80% of the wood fiber we use in the EU, mainly Northern, Eastern, and Central Europe, and we also source around 15% of the fiber in South Africa for domestic markets. Regulation and certification address a wide range of sustainability issues in sustainable working forests. For example, preventing overharvesting, supporting successful reforestation, and then also tending and protecting growing forests to maintain the important growth yields. We recognize that there are some critical areas where we need to evolve practices. For example, access and selection to resilient tree species and provenances, and proactive adaptation to climate change impacts. And this is where we see a need for the EU policy environment to evolve to support the multifunctional role of forests, carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, but also commercial and recreational use. And here we see the really critical role of science come to the fore. And that takes me on to the third element of the important aspects, the science-business collaboration. Via IUFRO and through the partnership of Teaming Up for Forests, we're helping to bridge that gap between scientific research and forest management. Teaming Up for Forests is aiming to enable science-based decision-making for forest management, ensuring that our strategies are grounded in scientific evidence and aligned with the long-term sustainability goals. Also helping to address long-term risks by providing scientific, evidence-based guidance to key role players, which includes policymakers and forest owners, about climate-fit strategies in our forests to ensure the resilience. Teaming Up for Forests importantly brings together policymakers, members of industry, and forest owners to inform and shape forest policy, but also practice in a way that reflects ecological realities and economic needs. And last but not least, the development of strategies to help forests remain productive and resilient in the face of climate change so that they can meet the many needs expected from them. Whether that's a quiet place for us to walk and recharge our batteries, or whether it's a source of raw material for wood-based products, or whether it's home to many of the species that live in our forests, or just the continuing provision of a carbon sink that's so critical. We are convinced that our role is to help to find ways for these expectations to be met with a balanced approach. Sustainably managed working forests can be an answer. Through initiatives like Teaming Up for Forest, we aim to foster collaboration between science and business, looking to answer the questions, for example, is the forest sector doing enough to support future forests? What changes are needed in forest regimes to secure both fiber and ecosystem services? So in summary, we recognize that forests are multidimensional landscapes and must be actively managed to meet the demands of climate resilience, biodiversity protection, and sustainable resource provision. We can't save the forests merely by setting aside more and more of the forest areas for protection, even if that is sometimes portrayed as the easy solution. Regulations and also certifications offer a strong foundation, but need to evolve to address future challenges. And we believe that it's through partnerships like we've heard with Edith in the Amazon, but also like with Teaming Up for Forests, that we are ensuring that our decisions are informed by science and aligned with long-term sustainability goals. Thanks, Alexander. Back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Gladys, first of all, for conveying so clearly, the message about the importance of forest management in the face of climate change and the multiple demands on forests, also needs economically, ecologically, and also socially. And special thanks also for, again, referring to the Teaming Up for Forests, this platform that has been launched jointly by MONDI and IUFRO as the two founding partners, and in which very many stakeholders very actively already participate. And I would like to encourage, participants in this webinar to also check out, the infograph that you referred to as a product of the Teaming Up for Forests. So thank you again, Gladys. And I would also like to encourage participants once more to post questions or comments in the chat, also reflecting on what our panelists have said so far. So please don't be shy. And with that, I would like to move on and invite our fourth panelist, Bernard de Galembert, to share actually the viewpoint of a broader industry coalition. Bernard, as the director of the Forest Solutions Group at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, you coordinate with multiple companies to drive sustainable forestry and climate action. And we have already heard Gladys talk about the bioeconomy. And taking your broader perspective across the forest sector, the bioeconomy is in fact often highlighted as a key pathway for decarbonization, yet scaling it up is not a trivial endeavor, not a trivial undertaking, and remains a challenge. So therefore, I'm eager to hear your views, Bernard, about how you think the forest-based bioeconomy can actually be upscaled, grow in line with both climate and biodiversity goals, and how we can at the same time avoid risks such as overharvesting forests or degrading our forest ecosystems. And of course, as a representative of the scientific community, you will not be surprised to have me also ask you how you see the role of science in this whole context. So Bernard, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the participants. Indeed, some of the companies members of the Forest Solutions Group are probably in this audience. At least one was just been speaking before me, is part of the Forest Solutions Group, so I'm under control in what I'm going to say. The challenge when you come last in a panel, to be honest, is that sometimes you feel you will simply repeat what others have been saying. So I'll put quite a few of the ideas that have been eloquently presented by Nelson, Edith, Isabel, Naylor, and Gladys, put that in a shaker. I'll make my own cocktail and share it back with you with a pinch of my own spice in this, if you don't mind. And the reality is that indeed the bioeconomy now is, I would say, back at the forefront. I was there when it was launched more than 10 years ago as the knowledge-based bioeconomy, at least in Europe, back in 2010 or around those years. And I've seen it going up and down, to be honest. But I think that now there is a bit of a momentum. We all remember the 10 principles of the G20 with really the massive role played by Brazil in devising those 10 principles, but also the fact that if I look at the COP, at the coming COP in Belém, and I look at the ambitions of the Brazilian presidency, they have put 30 objectives for that COP. And what they plan is really to make it as actionable as possible. So out of those 30 objectives, I've just listed 4, which are definitely relevant for us. And then I'll come to one of the overarching topics. And the 4 that are relevant are the need or the focus on tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency, the transition from fossil to renewable into a just, orderly, and equitable manner, the need to conserve, protect, and restore nature and ecosystems, and the notion of bioeconomy and biotechnology, where Brazil has been coming up with the notion of a socio-bioeconomy. And interestingly now, I see that when you speak of bioeconomy, you should, to be sort of correct, mention a sustainable, circular, socio-bioeconomy. That would be the way to encompass as much as the different components of the bioeconomy and take it on board. Now, we know that if we speak climate, the real focus is first decarbonize, and everyone should make its own fair share to reduce the emissions. That's the only way forward. But we know at the same time, and it's not by accident that the group I have the pleasure to lead now is called Forest Solutions Group. We know as well that forest and the forest sector have a positive role to play. They are really pivotal in providing solutions to the challenges we are facing, and especially the climate challenge. And so beyond reducing scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, what the forest sector can bring is what has been used to be called sequestration, storage, and substitution. So indeed, absorbing CO2, keeping and binding that CO2 in the forest and into the wood material, but also replacing with wood, and that's all the merits of the bioeconomy, replacing with renewables what is currently fossil, and de facto emitting more CO2 or putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. And already there, those 3 roles, those 3 functions require solid scientific knowledge and solid scientific input, and not, I mean, at least simply to measure those benefits of sequestration, storage, and substitution. Those 3 activities in the Forest Solutions Group, we have considered long ago into our net zero roadmap, and more recently into our decarbonization actions catalog, that they were to be part of a business strategy. So next to running the business, really take into consideration the way to abate your own emissions, but contribute in providing solutions beyond decarbonization. And that I will go through a few of what I see as solutions to really contribute to the climate ambitions. And the first one, pretty obvious, is about afforestation, reforestation, and sustainable forest management. And that's the way to enhance this carbon absorption into the forest and store it longer term into the vegetation, but also into the ground. And so again, that's where science can come, because a proper forest management, a proper afforestation, reforestation require knowing the stand, selecting the species right, putting the ecosystem preservation, protection, and restoration in place, etc., to make sure that we have the right forest in place and that are properly managed to be storing or sequestering carbon in the long term. And the same forest will, from a business perspective, be the ones that will be providing the future availability of the wood and the raw materials we need in the quality we need as well as the non-wood resources. And next to that, the same forest will deliver a series of ecosystem services that are important for people and society at large, such as water, nutrients, soil stabilization, shelter for the fauna, etc. And it will also contribute to communities' livelihood. And I think everyone around the table has been mentioning that, and it's not to be forgotten, the people living in and close to the forest. The second one is the need to halt for deforestation and forest degradation. And again, it's first and above all important to remind ourselves, and it comes from FAO, that the forest sector is not the biggest contributor to deforestation. Far from that, but still it has a role to play, and it has a role to play in providing solutions as well, because that's the only way also to avoid the release of large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. And again, their science can help with aerial satellite observation and the analysis of those data, but also other tools that could help preventing illegal logging or undesired practices and forest degradation. Then third, I would like to mention the restoration of degraded ecosystems. And I think it was Nelson mentioning nature-based solutions that might be the ways and the tools to indeed restore and protect degraded ecosystems. And Nelson as well was mentioning the fact that this must happen at landscape level because different ecosystems depend on each other. So let's not work in silos, but really break those Chinese walls between forestry, agriculture, and food and other approaches at the system level. So because it's about protecting also wetlands, freshwater systems, river and lakes, forests as such, and also the agricultural fields and areas, so that they provide benefits that go beyond the benefits for the ecosystem per se, but as said, for the ecosystems in the neighborhood and surroundings or next to those ecosystems. And that will help also. What is critically important for forest is indeed adaptation and resilience. And what we see currently in the business sector increasingly facing this kind of physical risks, such as climate risk, is that becomes a business imperative simply because insurance companies and the banking sector are increasingly, let's say, scared about those risks. And so the willingness to finance and support sectors, so insure and finance the sector and invest in those sectors, is likely to go down if we don't find by ourselves the solution to address those physical risks. Obviously, because I'm speaking on behalf of the business, what's important is also that we get the raw material we need. So it's about wood for sure. And there we know that the wood, and Gladys mentioned, it must come at least from sustainably managed forest and certified forest. As we speak, there is currently the General Assembly of FSC going on, I think, in Panama. And the time has come probably for the certification systems to adapt and adjust as well, because it's not something static, sustainable forest management. It's something that is constantly changing, improving, as science tells us, and learns us about what's happening in the forest and what needs to be done to properly manage them. So from that perspective, indeed, it's important for certification systems as well to adjust, and also to company procurement teams to adjust their own policies accordingly when buying wood.
Anna.
Then
thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out a little bit of time. But please, one more minute to just conclude your thoughts. Yeah. Is there still some concluding sentence?
I think I cut you off. A few concluding remarks. If I may, yes. I'll take one more minute and I'll go through what I think are key principles to activate all those elements. Because all these benefits must build on a series of principles, which for me are the need to be able to measure and report. So we need metrics and we need the capacity to disclose and show progress transparently. We need now to have additionality. Business as usual is no longer an option. We need to do more and better. We should avoid shifting the problems or transferring the problem elsewhere. So the whole discussion around leakage, and that was also coming from, at the time, the biofuels and bioenergy discussion. And last, the need to be just indeed, to make sure that we act as good neighbors, that we're inclusive, that we care for people, not only people in our companies, but around us.
Bernard, thank you so very much, and apologies for cutting you off a little bit there, but it's in the interest of still having sufficient time for discussion with our audience. And with that, really, I would like to thank each and every one of our 4 panelists for sharing with us your really fascinating and unique insights coming from different kind of, points of view, from the science, from the business, and from the policy. With that, I would like to actually open, the discussion, the Q&A. And in that, I will be assisted by my colleagues Maya and Laura, who actually, I think, have collected the questions. I can see some in the chat. I'm not sure, Maya and Laura, should we perhaps start with those ones and then perhaps see what else there is? And having said that, I would really like to continue to encourage our participants to post their questions in the chat. Don't be shy. I think there's a lot of food for thought that has been presented to us by our panelists. But having said that, I would like to start with the first question or comment that is in the chat. And it says that, unfortunately, it comes from Tomasz Paredes, I think. It says that, unfortunately, policies in the European Union are mostly leading towards lower usage of the natural resources within Europe. It seems that it is not clear to policymakers which consequences we can expect on a global level, as consumption of materials and products in Europe is still growing. We are just moving demand from Europe towards lower regulated areas. Do panelists see it in a similar way, and what could we do about it on the local level? So I guess the point here is demand for forest products is growing in Europe, and I guess also globally. That's what the FAO data shows us. But at the same time, the ability to actually produce, wood and wood products, to source the material from Europe is being increasingly affected by conservation and protection legislation. So we see this kind of displacement or leakage to other regions. That is a rather hard question, I guess, to answer. But I wonder who of our panelists would like to share his or her thoughts on that topic.
I could start.
Nelson, perhaps. Exactly, yes. Thank you, Nelson. Yes.
So I think this is... It comes from 2 separate things that have binded together. On the one hand, we have that in most countries in the EU, the system of government are strong democracies, where governments make the laws according to what their constituencies expect. Then, on the other side, we have maybe lack of information or some disinformation among the general public on what it means to manage the forest. For many people, managing the forest implies destroying it. But this is, it can be, but there are many different ways of managing the forest. And if the forests are managed in a sustainable way, this is not only a way to not destroy the forest, but also to maybe even improve its healthiness, its shape. So I think in the EU, the problem of laws going towards less or more restrictive use of the forest is a combination of these 2 factors. And this could be solved or improved by first communicating better with the general public that sustainable forest management is a good way to go. And second, also communicating with the policymakers that there are many different ways that don't imply restrictive access to the forest to satisfy these needs of biodiversity and protection.
Thank you very much, Nelson, for pointing out, especially also the communication challenges that come along with this issue. And I guess that is also something that we as the scientific community need to reflect on, how we can become even better in communicating, what we know about also the benefits of managing our forests. And that again brings us back to teaming up for forests, where we partner with the private sector to do better and also in how we communicate these scientific facts and the scientific evidence. I'm not sure whether any of our other panelists wishes to briefly reflect on that question. Yes, Bernard, please.
And I will be brief this time. No, just to say, I think that we are living the consequences of a bit of the past and the history, where possibly the focus on sustainable production and consumption was not there, on sustainable use of resources was much less there than it is today. And I think it's indeed part of the new narrative we must put forward. And that's where the notion, several notions that have been coming up, such as the notion of cascade use, make a lot of sense, because we need to really make the best out of a resource which is, even if it's renewable, is limited. And so we need to take that into account. And so if we take cascade together with circularity, and that means also designing our products in a way that they can be reused, recycled, etc. And we know that in the paper sector, and Thomas, by the way, nice to see you on the call, because we know each other for a while, but we know that the paper sector is a world-class champion in terms of recycling. But is it valid for the solid timber, mass timber sector? I'm not that sure, to be honest. So I think there is still room for improvement on that front to really improve the overall narrative around the forest sector and the use of wood.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for also making this point about, using our resources efficiently and putting in place kind of procedures and mechanisms that allow us to be efficient with our very valuable wood-based resources. Thank you for that. I must praise our... Yeah, Gladys, yes.
Because maybe I would just add one point from the perspective of being in the fiber-based packaging sector. And I think Bernard's point around using this resource that we have in the forest wisely is a really critical one. So if we think about moving to using more wood-based products, so also transitioning our packaging to fiber-based packaging solutions, it's as critical for us to focus on making sure that we're able to keep those fibers in circulation for as long as possible. We often face the misconception that we can all just move to completely recycled fibers, but of course, our aim is to keep using them as many times as possible, but we recognize that we are always going to need sort of fresh fiber, virgin fiber into the cycle. So I think really important that we think about how we transition our economies to be able to keep those materials in circulation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gladys, for making that important point that while we, of course, embrace the principle of circularity, but there are also certain limits to, to that concept. So that's important also to be mindful about that. Thanks a lot. What I wanted to say, I must praise our participants, because the questions you post in the chat are really actually not easy questions to answer, I must say, so, but really spot on. So the next question comes from Pichdara Lon, and Pichdara, you say that nature-based solutions is just a new term for old practices, right? When, for example, to think about agroforestry or reforestation. If so, why do we need to create a new term for solving the same problems? Yeah, so of course, I think, all of us, having been around for a while, we see these new concepts emerge. And the question always is, how much substance is behind those concepts, behind those discourses? I guess that is really the point that you intend to make, Pichdara. And I wonder who of our panelists would like to share a perspective on that. I guess it's more a comment than a question. Anyone?
Alexander.
Yeah, Bernard, and then
I made the mistake of using the word nature-based solution, and I think Nelson did as well. So that's why we have to raise our hands at least to to explain. And honestly, I'm a bit more than a year and a half into WBCSD, and for me, it's a sort of new word as well, a new concept as well. And it's true, Pishdara, that it includes indeed things that have been there for ages, put into a sort of umbrella, what we in French would call mot valise, so suitcase word, sort of, if I translate literally. We put everything into the same word, but actually indeed is this kind of practices that are well known, but still within those practices, we hear some new ones emerging, such as regenerative forestry, which was probably not there but some years ago. And so even if the NBS concept as such is a sort of a frame and a box to put existing old concepts into it, I think there are new ones emerging in terms of improving our practices, also because of, and I refer back to what I said before, the need to approach things more at a landscape level with an ecosystem perspective in mind, rather than a single, let's say, forestry only approach versus a farming activity alone, etc. So.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. You mentioned the nature-based solutions in your intervention. Nelson, if that is all right, I would like to give the floor to Edith, who also raised her hand on that question, because Nelson, there's another one later on RED Plus in the chat, and since the EU4 Science Policy Program did a study on that, perhaps you could reflect on that. And then I just learned from Laura and Maya that we do have a few more questions that are not yet reflected in the chat. So I would ask every one of you to be very brief in your responses. But Edith, could I ask you to also for your reflections on the concept of nature-based solutions?
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I do agree until some point with the question, but I think that nature-based solutions right now are a little bit broader. I mean, they're taking more of the services that ecosystems have, and there could be, and that are already being part and have been taken as part of the solution. Because I think historically it was very focused on environment and with forests as well. But as I said before, the Amazon, for example, it's not just an ecosystem where we mainly have forests, but there are other services that are provided by the forest. And that's this new terminology. And also it's very important that it was very environmental oriented. And this, it's not just the terminology, but it's very important to put, and I'm gonna ratify that as well, to put people at the center. And that's very important. And people of the center are part of the solutions as well. So for example, the mechanism, the platform that we're having right now with including that historically, we're going to sit down, one person of the government and one representative of the indigenous communities together, taking decisions on what's the best for the people, but with the people at the table. So that's very important because they should be part of the solution, and it's not just the environment, but we do have other services that these important ecosystems provide, and that weren't taken into consideration for other strategies, for other projects and programs in order to tackle mitigation and adaptation. And that's another discussion that we will have now, about how we are approaching mitigation and adaptation and biodiversity and climate change, because there's a lot, but part of all that, it's looking for, they are not separate, and how do we bring everything together? It's to have something in the middle that could join both approaches, and then we get these new solutions.
Thank you very much, Edith. I mean, the way you describe it, really nature-based, this new concept of nature-based solutions could potentially be a means of integrating more effectively these different dimensions that we have been discussing so far in this webinar. So that is really great to hear from you. Nelson, if I may then, now I put you on the spot for the next comment in the chat, or the next question, and that is about RED Plus. And the question reads, again, coming from Vijdara, are RED Plus project effective, transparent in terms of forest conservation and human well-being and markets /transactions/trading? Perhaps, I mean, it's a very big question. It could be debated for weeks probably, but perhaps, Nelson, from the scientific point of view, could you just very briefly elaborate on the effectiveness and transparency of RED+ approaches and what science so far could tell us about that?
Sure. As you mentioned before, a couple of years ago, within the science policy program, we published a whole assessment on RED+ and its outcomes, which in turn was an update of an assessment we published at the beginning of the implementation of the RED+ program about 12, 15 years ago. So I may be able to say some things about it. Regarding the specific question, we have to consider that the RED+ program is something of a magnitude that had not or had rarely been designed and implemented before. So of course it was not a perfect program from the beginning, but in the past of the years, a lot of amendments have been made into the program guidelines and into how the program is doing things. And one example is the establishment of the safeguards, which came as the result of they realized that RED+ was more on the biophysical side and was not taking into account the social and economic aspects of the forest where it was implemented, or at least not in a way that was meaningful. So these safeguards try to make it better for the people living in the forest where RED+ programs, projects were implemented, to ensure that the project would be fair to them. Of course, this came as a patch into the project, as a solution that came afterwards. So it was also not perfect. And these safeguards also have been modified through the years, and new safeguards came in, old safeguards were expanded or modified. So this is an evolving project that is learning by doing. We cannot expect something this big to function smoothly from the beginning. And there will be a lot more to say, but I think
no, but thank you very much, Nelson. Thanks a lot. And of course, I would like to encourage participants of this webinar to also visit the IUFRO webpage and look up that study that was prepared by our science policy, by IUFRO Science Policy Program some time ago. And with that, I would like to ask Maya and Laura, my two colleagues, whether there are also, I take it there are some questions, some additional questions that were submitted. So Maya, Laura, and over to you.
Thank you, Alexander. So we have another question in the chat coming from Mirjana, specifically for Edith. So the question is how the platform will be used to foster the dialogue and exchange between policy and local people, and if you could provide one example. And also in that direction, I just got a previous, another question in the same direction. If these decisions made together with the people will be binding for the policy and in which way? Thank you.
Laura, I think the question went to Edith, is that right? Yes, Edith, please, yes.
Thank you, Alexander and Laura. Well, as I mentioned before, this platform is a space where people from the government, one representative from the government, from the 8 governments, and one representative from the local communities or local organizations are sitting together to discuss the whole programmatic agenda for ACTO. So it won't be possible to have different spaces for each topic. So this mechanism platform aims to do that. Within these, they have already approved their governance, they have already approved their work plan, they are having their first meeting in COP30 as well. And they will go through that agenda. So all the topics, for example, if we want to talk something about forests, at the network with the Amazonian Network for Forests. And there's something specific for indigenous people, then this space will be the platform, since we have the government and the local people representatives. If we have to deal about financial mechanisms, no, their priorities, what they're looking for, that will be the platform. So those will have these consultation spaces with them, being that the network, no, where everything will be discussed, and all the other topics, all the other technical teams or the political teams will get there, and from there we'll get the solutions. They represent the representatives of the local organizations. They are the organizations that are also have been taken from the government. So we have the 8 organizations. They are the strongest ones at the Amazon level. They are not national organizations. They are represent the Amazon indigenous people, local communities, and traditional communities as well. So and the governments, they decided who's going to be represented. So that will be the example. And then we have another, that's part of the civil society chapter, that it has been open. ACTO didn't have that approach until 2023. With the Berlin Declaration and the President Summit at that time, and now that we did have the next President Summit 3 months ago, it was ratified that we have to open our channel of discussions with civil society. That means indigenous people, academia, local communities, the scientists, and the civil society as well, NGOs, private sector as well. So we are starting those discussions. We are talking about the network of networks that they accumulate around 400 organizations from the local level. So we are not able to talk to each one of them. So that's why we're talking about with platforms, mechanisms internally, and representatives of the civil society that are already working together.
Thank you so much, Edith. And unfortunately, we are already getting a little bit short on time, but I still want to also ask my colleague Maya. I think there's one other question that comes from the audience, right?
Yes, indeed, Alexander. So it is a question for the Gladys. Given the decline in yield class of many European forests and the relatively large area of protected woodland, how will you ensure future raw material supplies without damaging at least some of the protected forest areas, Gladys?
Ladies, and I'm sorry because that is a big question, but could I ask you to be as brief as you can in at least trying to answer it?
Thank you, Alexander. I will do my best, but perhaps just first to say that these are exactly the type of questions that we have to answer in order to secure future raw materials. And again, here we see the importance of the collaboration with scientists to help us answer them effectively. So I would refer you actually to the IUFRO report that deals with sourcing in disruptive times, where you can explore some of these themes in more detail. But maybe I'll just give 3 short examples of things that could be done. So I mentioned earlier stand density, and here actions such as thinning could perhaps provide more wood into the market to be used, while at the same time allowing the forests to continue to be resilient. Secondly, and perhaps it could be controversially as well, considering things like shortening the rotation cycles. And then a third example of something that could be considered is afforestation, where we potentially can look for areas of marginal land not suitable for agriculture that could be used for growing trees. So just some quick thoughts on things that could be considered. But yeah, as you said, Alexander, a complicated question.
But Gladys, thank you so much. You managed perfectly well in, giving some really great examples in answering that question. Colleagues, we had a very rich discussion. There would be more questions even, which I think tells us that we need more of these webinars. And it was the interest of the audience. I think it's impossible to summarize, properly what has been said by our distinguished panelists, but just perhaps a few points. I think the first thing is, and I think Bernard said it, the fundamental thing to start with is that we must reduce emissions in the first place. That is not a role of the forest sector per se, but that is a role of the globe as a whole. But of course, it's also clear that, forests are indispensable for climate mitigation. But I think at the same time, I think it has become clear from our discussion that we must stay realistic and that we must ground strategies on robust data and transparent processes. The other thing that I think came out rather clearly that when discussing the role of forests in the context of climate change, we must actually always keep in mind that we need to find a balance between forest, climate, and biodiversity goals, and also keep in mind the social dimensions. Edith, you said this multiple times. When talking about forest, we actually also talk about the people. So it's really very much important to integrate policies and strategies across multiple levels, all the way from the local via the regional to the global level. I think it also became clear that the industry plays a highly important role through investing in sustainable forestry, through developing wood-based products that reduce emissions, and also by committing to deforestation-free supply chains. So industry clearly is a very, very important partner in addressing the challenges that come with climate change. I think to really sum up, what is really needed is collaboration. Our platforms, we heard the term platforms multiple times in this call. Teaming Up for Forest is one such platform for collaboration. So I encourage everyone to continue to be involved, to continue to follow our work, and to stay tuned also to future webinars. But before closing, I would like to most sincerely thank certainly our five actually speakers and panelists really for your excellent contributions to the discussion. And of course, I also want to thank the team that organized the webinar technically. And of course, all of you, the participants who contributed to the discussion. Together, let's keep teaming up for forests on the road to COP30 and beyond. So thanks a lot and goodbye. Thank you. And where's the button? Where's the button for the applause for the panelists? Now I can't find it. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.